Dr. Chopra, we have just spent the past few minutes talking about your previous book, Super Brain. Now, before we jump into your new book, Super Genes, what I'd love to do is give our students, our members, and all of our guests access to understanding your story. Because as a leader, we want to understand where you came from, as a university student to where you are today. If you could share some of that journey with us and some of the pivotal points along the way, we'd love to have that story shared with our members.
Well, I learned how to be a medical doctor. I took training in internal medicine and endocrinology, which is the study of hormones, and then I studied neuroendocrinology, which is the understanding of brain chemistry. At this point, I became very interested in how what happens in our mind or in our consciousness influences what happens in our biology. When I was studying, we were making new discoveries in that we were finding that there were certain chemicals in the brain which we call neuropeptides, which are literally the molecules of emotion. So it became obvious to me that emotions are very important in how our body responds to the world, but also emotions trigger changes in our biology. If you're stressed, you have a certain biology. If you are happy, in love, feel compassion, you have a different biology. So that was obvious to me, but then the second part was, why was it that two people could be exposed to the same virus or infection and not everybody got sick? Mm-hmm. People got exposed to the same carcinogen, not everybody got cancer. Or why two people saw the same physician, got the same treatment, had the same illness, and had different outcomes. So I started looking for a connection between what was happening in our biology and how it was responding to what was happening in our consciousness. At this time, there was no science for this, except the one that a few of us were doing. So mainstream medicine was not very responsive to it, but I had an inner conviction that I needed to explore this and that this was my calling. And so in a way I did it, notwithstanding the fact that I was heavily criticized, vilified, called a charlatan, and many things. Now 30 years later, we have the science. Mm-hmm. We have the science of the mind-body connection or inseparability. We have a science on how the brain is rewired depending on our experiences of life and our behaviors. We even have a science on how our genes are influenced by experience. And so, you know, this was my personal journey. I had to be immune to both criticism and flattery. Mm-hmm. I had to, in a sense, be fearless. And I had to not worry about what people said, and I had to have the conviction of what I knew to be true. I had to stand up to my truth.
I mean, so many different topics that you just, I mean, as far as finding out what your passion is, figuring out how to stand up for your convictions of where you wanted to go, so many things that will resonate with our students. And so, you know, fast forward to where we are today, and let me ask you, you know, it's an inspiring story to hear where you came from to where you are today, but what was the inspiration with this, Super Genes?
Well, Super Brain was written in partnership with a Harvard neurogeneticist. His name is Rudy Tanzi, who's also my collaborator in this book. And I met him at a TED conference, and we got to speaking actually in the men's room, where we happened to run into each other. And I asked him if the brain was a noun or a verb. And he said, let's go outside and talk. And we started having this conversation. And soon both of us were saying, you know, we look at the brain as a noun, but actually the brain is a verb. It's an activity. It responds to every experience. And since the brain is created by your genes, the genes are also verbs. They're not nouns, they're activities. So Super Brain came first and Super Genes now. We have 23,000 genes that make up the whole body. Mm-hmm. You know, so when we were first conceived, that's all we had. At the time of birth, we acquired some more genes, and there were bacterial genes. It's called the microbiome. And so this microbial colony that's all in your skin, in your gut, everywhere, it interacts with the human genome, and then our own experiences of life, which is everything from personal relationships to emotions, to social interactions, to how we interact with the environment. That whole activity is called the epigenetic activity, which influences the expression of genes. It's quite complex, but this is what we know now. To make it very simple, every experience and how we interpret experience actually influences the activity of our genes. So there are genes that create self-regulation, healing, etc. And there are genes which, if they're out of balance, they cause inflammation in the body. And what we're learning is you can influence the activity of these genes by how you think, how you feel, even how you speak, because your speech represents your emotions and thoughts, and of course how you behave. And that you can learn to literally activate the genes that will trigger an integrated brain for leadership. And so I've been teaching leadership at Columbia Business School, and I've been teaching leadership at Kellogg School of Management. And the first thing I ask students when they come in is, who are you? Behind your social mask and your name and your physical form, who are you in reality? It's a jarring question for a lot of people because they've never thought of it. Then I ask them, and I let them cogitate on that, meditate on that. The second question I ask is, what do you want? Okay, what do you want from your life? And the third is, do you have a purpose? Do you have a calling? And the fourth is, what are you grateful for? So we spend a lot of time just with these 4 questions. And then I create what I call a soul profile for leadership, where they have to answer a few more questions. What kind of leader do I want to be? Why do I want to be a leader? Okay, people, what's the motivation if I want to be a leader? What kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of leader do I want to be? Because you mentioned thought leadership, there's market leadership, there is what is called team leadership, and ideally leadership involves all of those factors: thought, teams, market, knowing what the zeitgeist is. So I ask them all these questions, but then I also ask them, do you have any heroes, any mentors in history, in mythology, in religion, in the public sphere? What are your unique skills and talents? What do you value in relationships or in friendships? And having asked all these questions, we create a soul profile. Now they get to know who they are. And then I ask them to write their leadership story. Okay, so every story, there's a backstory, there's what's happening now and what's the future, and what happens when I get there. And by this time, this is only the first 2 hours of leadership. We see, at least I see, that these students, I thought they were coming to business school to learn about business, but they're coming to business school because deep inside their heart, they want to change the world. They want to make it a better world. So then we practice all these skills, and ultimately we say, if you repeat these skills, all you have to do is just focus on what you want and what kind of leader you want to be, and learn certain principles. Learn to listen, not just as an observer, but learn to listen with your heart, learn to listen with your soul, learn to be quiet, understand that most people respond to emotions, even though they pretend they respond to facts. They use facts to justify their emotions. And expand your awareness. Keep asking, what am I observing? What am I feeling? What is needed? As a leader, how can I provide that need? Be action-oriented. Just don't be a philosopher, because otherwise it's not going to make any difference. So have smart goals. Stretch more than you can reach. measure everything, make sure that everybody on the team agrees, record your progress, set time limits, take responsibility for your health, because if you're not feeling emotionally, spiritually, physically healthy, people will lose confidence in you, because when you go out there in the world, what happens is you're reflecting your state of well-being inside. And that's not just physical, it's also emotional, it's spiritual, it's social, and ultimately it affects our economic well-being and community well-being. I talk about what it takes to empower yourself. And then finally, I also talk about one thing that leaders mention. If you look at their lives, they all mention that they were lucky, or they had many coincidences, or it was a state of grace. There's a spiritual element to leadership. That's basically what the course is about, but it's based on some very hard science. Because once you start to repeat behaviors consciously, you're actually changing your entire genomic expression, and you're changing your brain, so that leadership becomes a normal activity for you. It's not something you exercise.
And it's really a groundbreaking thought to actually be able to control those genes, to be able to have influence over them. And for a lot of our leaders, our members right now, they're going through those questions that you asked your class, that they're wondering, what are you about? What's your purpose? What kind of leader do you want to be? Why do you want to be that leader? And many of them are going through the steps of our program right now, where they're writing their autobiography like they were 75 years old. What will they have accomplished during that time? And they're asking themselves and meeting in small groups, what are my goals? How am I going to hold myself accountable to that? So I'm so glad that those things reflect. But there are a lot of concepts, in super genes as far as that hardwiredness. One of the ones that I really resonated with was the placebo effect. If you could talk a little bit about that for our members especially, how can a student, what is that placebo effect, but how can, you really work with your brain in terms of...
Well, for many years it's been known that if you give people a sugar pill, which is pharmaceutically inert, 30% of people will still have the response that they were told they will have. And that's true even if you give them an inert chemotherapy. They'll have the side effects. The hair will fall out, they'll have nausea, vomiting. So this has been called the placebo response. Placebo, the Latin word, means I shall please. And the opposite of that is nocebo, I shall not please.
Right.
And no one's really understood that until recently. But basically what it says is that what you think is true, which is your inner belief actually, because a belief is an idea that you hold to be true, that actually influences what you will see, what you will perceive, and how you will function in the world. So your inner beliefs actually create your reality. If you're used to the expression seeing is believing, it's not true, it's the opposite thing. Believing is seeing. So what do you believe? And I think the most important belief you can hold is what do you believe about yourself? That's why the first question is, who are you? People have all kinds of responses, but at the core of your being, you have infinite potential, because before our mind is conditioned by either society or unfortunately by education sometimes, the word educore literally means to bring out what's already at the core of a being. Okay, so education should include this, that at the core of your being, you're a field of infinite possibilities. At the core of your being, you have infinite creativity. Of course, you have all the Platonic values like truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, love, compassion, joy, equanimity. You have to bring these out from within. And once you start to do this, you have what is called true self-esteem. Because self-esteem is not the same thing as self-image. Self-image is what other people think of you. Self-esteem is who do you think you are at the core of your being. And once you start to get there, then that reflects in everything that happens outside. Absolutely. And so it's not, placebo is a term that we've used not knowing what's really going on. Now that we know what's going on, actually we can amplify the effect by always being true to ourselves.
Wow. And so what you believe is really what you see. And so, but for our students who are sitting there going, I can believe I can be anything, but what's the reality going back to the positive or negative life choices that they're making? And not only what impact do they have immediately, but how they perceive themselves and looking at that daily ritual of getting into their lives. What kind of impact will that have as far as?
Well, if you ask people why they're doing what they're doing, they'll say, I want to make money, or they'll say, I want to be successful, or they'll say, I want to be the CEO of a company. They'll give you some answer. But then you say, why do you want to do that? And they'll give you another answer. But in the end, if you pursue this, why do you want to do this? In the end, almost everybody says, I want to be happy. Okay, so happiness is the goal of all other goals. You have to first realize that. But then you have to also redefine, as we've done in the early part of the show, what the mechanics of that happiness is. And you'll see that happiness is not possible if it's only about you. Okay, the happiness is only possible when there's meaning, and there's purpose, and there's fulfillment. So you have to redefine success then. What is success? In my view, success is the progressive realization of worthy goals. But it's also the ability to love and to have compassion. And finally, it's the ability to get in touch with the core of your being, where there are infinite possibilities. So again, we come back to the first thing, reflection. You cannot know yourself without self-reflection. And in the absence of knowing yourself, you cannot know the world, because the world is a reflection of who you think you are. You're not just your name or your physical body or your ego identity or what others think about you. You come with infinite potential into the world. The Indian poet Tagore said, every child that is born is proof that God has not given up on human beings. So don't give up on yourself. If the universe has not given up on you, you shouldn't give up on yourself. Unfortunately, what happens is there's a lot of conditioning that's going on with the media, with what other people define as success, and that those views keep getting recycled. And most people don't take time to step back and say, is this true?
And so let me ask you, because we're going to be running short here on time soon, out of all the reflection component, going back and saying, this is who I am as a leader and reflecting on yourself, what would you, sum up to be an important leadership principle for students to look at beyond that reflection for them to subscribe to?
This is the acronym, LEADERS, leaders. L stands for look and listen.
Yep.
E stands for learn to connect emotionally. A stands expand your awareness, which is needs and responses.
Absolutely.
D stands for doing. Be action oriented. The next E stands for self-esteem. Then R stands for responsibility. And S stands for synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences in your life that you should seize upon, because good luck is nothing but opportunity meeting preparedness.
I love that.
So that's the acronym.
First, we want to thank Dr. Chopra for his time today. Dr. Chopra, very fascinating words, but also very important words for our members to hear as they're going through their university experience. And also, we want to remind our viewers today that you can go out on November 10th and get a copy of his new book, Super Genes, and take some of the principles that he shared with us today and be able to implement them into your own life. Thank you for joining us.